Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amy. I'm here with Transform. Thanks for joining us for our official launch of the report Ride Fearlessly, a framework for reimagining transit safety. We've got a couple more folks trickling in, so we'll get started in 2 minutes. Thanks for the love in the chat. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Amy Thompson. I'm the Transportation Policy and Programs Manager with Transform. I will be facilitating this conversation today, which is the official launch of our report, Ride Fearlessly. And as we're getting started, we first wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that we're really in a horrific moment, particularly for anyone directly impacted by the atrocious violence in Israel and Palestine. And we want to thank you for joining us on your Friday afternoon amidst these upsetting current events and shifting to thinking about how we can create a more just and peaceful public transportation system, which will be our topic of discussion for today. Next slide, please. If you're not familiar with Transform, we promote walkable communities with excellent transportation choices to connect people of all incomes to opportunity, make California affordable, and help solve our climate crisis. And we're here today to talk about inclusive and safe transit for all. And I want to first take a moment to briefly discuss how we ended up with a system that is not safe for everyone. And it started because we live in a region that was built to move cars and not buses. And that's because our cities were built on racist housing and transportation policies that prioritized and supported white people to buy cars and homes and build wealth. And now we have racial inequality, segregation, urban sprawl, and insufficient transit infrastructure. And the challenge and need to ensure that everyone has access to schools, groceries, and jobs just got a whole lot harder. Safe, fast, reliable, and frequent transit is essential to a thriving Bay Area, and rebuilding trust and ridership on transit is essential for a few reasons. First of all, our transit riders are more likely to be low income and people of color. The same goes with zero-car households. Second, transit is simply just the most affordable, sustainable, and accessible transportation mode we have. It's a lifeline for people living with disabilities. And third, we know that transit can work. We've seen it work in cities like New York and Paris, and there's no reason the Bay Area can't be one of those places, but we have our work cut out for us. In a recent survey, 40% of respondents said personal safety concerns are why they do not take public transit in the Bay Area more frequently. And personal safety is really complex. We wanted to dig into safety on transit to better understand it so we can work to improve it. Our existing safety tools rely on policing, which does not make everyone feel safe, particularly Black and Brown people who are targeted by police violence. We wanted to explore methods for safety beyond policing that cultivate safety for all. Next slide, please. We have a really exciting agenda today. We will have an overview of the report by author Reimagining, and then I will be introducing a really excellent panel of guests for a discussion. Next slide, please. So Halima Barucha is a formidable Gen Z South Asian advocate, acknowledged by She, the People's 25 Under 25 Women of Color to Watch. Her approach to systems change is exemplified in her former work as the advocacy director at Alliance for Girls, where she co-led the first youth-driven community initiative, Not One More Girl, to address gender-based violence on BART. She has spoken at the American Public Transportation Association conference's main stage on moving beyond policing on public transit, and is a thought leader on safety from sexual harassment on public transit. Next, I will pass it to Halima to overview the report.
Thank you so much, Amy, for that introduction. And before I delve into what brought me to this work, I'd like to just express my gratitude to you and to Zach for your contributions in the creation of this report and making sure that everything went smoothly. So really appreciate all the time, energy, and work that you put into it. And so to start, I'll share a little bit about what brought me into this work. It was my first time boarding a BART train, and the station was swarming with a rush of people heading to San Francisco. My anticipation was palpable and for that first BART ride, but it dissipated rapidly when I was confronted with verbal threats. Still reeling from the encounter, I ran into the BART car seeking refuge, but still looking over my shoulder to make sure that I wasn't being followed. And over the years, my continued use of BART was marked by a persistent need for vigilance. And despite my best efforts to take precautions, it still felt like an insurmountable challenge to shield myself from harassment. The ordeals ranged from instances to indecent exposure to unsettling encounters when I was followed and subjected to verbal abuse. And every journey on public transit seemed like it was gearing up for a battlefield, causing me to dread every time I stepped foot onto the station. And what I realized from all this was that the existing system is deeply flawed. It not only fails to address issues of safety effectively, but it also exacerbates the problem through the deployment of armed police, a resource that I have personally never relied on. The commonly used security slogan, "See something, say something," only served as a grim reminder of the systemic racial profiling that my community has endured and continues to face. And in the belief that a different approach was not just necessary, but also possible, I took the lead in assembling a coalition of organizations and young leaders through my role as the advocacy director at Alliance for Girls. And together we pioneered a groundbreaking, comprehensive strategy to combat sexual harassment without resorting to an increase in policing. Our approach's resounding success can be attributed to one fundamental thing. It was driven by those who had directly experienced the issue. Since then, this model has grown, earned national recognition, and served as the inspiration behind 2 state bills that are now signed into law. And so what this proved to me is that there is an alternative path forward. We have the capability to establish a safer environment on public transit without the constant presence of police. And through an exhaustive process of interviews, case studies, and literature reviews, I formulated a 3-pronged framework that encapsulates promising practices for enhancing transit safety. If we go to the next slide, I'll talk through a little bit of what this approach looked like and what it consisted of. We had conducted a number of virtual interviews online encompassing stakeholders in the transit field, from transit agencies to transit advocates and non-transit community-based organizations, because there is so much that we can learn from what folks in different spaces like the disability justice community are doing. Secondly, in order to look beyond policing and to really understand what makes everybody feel safe, we centered those most impacted. And that's looking at BIPOC communities who have been disproportionately affected and targeted by policing and carceral approaches. And finally, anchoring in real life examples by talking to transit agencies who have done this work, by talking to community organizations who have created successful models of safety to understand, and that led us to this 3-pronged framework. So if we go to the next slide, I'll talk through a little bit of what this framework looks like. As Amy mentioned, riders are increasingly hesitant to use public transit due to safety concerns. And this is especially troubling for those who rely on public transit as their primary and only means of transportation. A Harvard study underscored the significance of transportation in shaping economic mobility, revealing that it has more significant impact than other factors typically assumed to be most influential, such as elementary school test scores. And so the work of ensuring safety on public transit is far beyond just the ability to use transit, but it also affects people's ability to escape the cycle of poverty, to access schools, work, medical appointments, community, family. It's a lifeline. And so it creates an even more sense of urgency for why this is important right now. And so this framework, if we go to the next slide, the first approach in this framework is to reimagine safety approaches by working on creating innovative pilot efforts and partnerships that center community-based organizations, service providers, and marginalized communities. Many efforts have started as pilots, and they really give a lot of flexibility to transit agencies to be able to play around and see, is this a model that works? What do riders think about it? And be able to make adjustments before making permanent changes. It also allows for more flexibility in how creative we can get with what we do. And I truly think that we need to get creative with how we think about safety. So if we go to the next slide, and the one after that, one of the case studies that we highlighted was SEPTA's SCOPE program. This is a comprehensive program where the Southern Pennsylvania Transportation Agency partnered with service providers, working with unhoused communities to make sure through its program, which stands for Safety, Cleaning, Ownership, Partnership, and Engagement, that mental health workers, peer health workers, and health navigators are deployed throughout the system to support unhoused people with finding resources, connecting them to local service providers. But not only that, they're also coordinating with local service providers on how they can work together to ensure that people are receiving services and getting the referrals and support that they need. This program has provided aid to over 4,000 vulnerable individuals monthly, connecting them to resources like emergency rooms, food pantries, drug and alcohol treatment, mental health support, and shelters. And this program has also reduced assaults on employees and improved rider satisfaction. In June of 2023 alone, their outreach staff completed 628 referrals to resources, 3 Narcan deployments, and 31 warm handoffs of vulnerable people to direct service providers. And so this model really proved that taking a mental health and public health approach to addressing some of the concerns that people have on public transit can provide not only better outcomes for those who are struggling in our community, but also to reduce incidents for employees and improve rider satisfaction. The second prong of this framework is focused on redesigning systems, cultures, and spaces, with the recognition and understanding that it is not enough to simply change a policy. We also have to address the damaging cultural norms, such as rape culture, that normalize everyday acts of harassment and harm. I think especially in this moment, as we see an uptick in hate incidents against Muslims and Jewish people, this is a time to, again, consider how we can combat these harmful cultural norms that make it okay to target some people. Further, we can use physical environmental design strategies such as thinking about bright lighting, accessible operator call boxes, specific designated areas where people can safely wait to get picked up, to make sure that, again, we're creating safety just by the built environment, the way that we are designing our spaces, our trains, our buses, our waiting stations. And then finally, thinking about how we redesign the system to really center on what riders' needs are. The pandemic definitely affected so many patterns, right? Not everyone goes to work every day anymore, right? Things have changed. And so thinking about how we can adjust to these rider patterns post shutdown and really cater to that. So riders don't have to wait for long periods of time, and can also have kind of an increase in riderships when they are riding, they're with other people. And then finally, to kind of highlight one of the examples that I was involved with, and I'm really excited also that some folks from BART are here today. The Not One More Girl initiative is one of those examples where not only policy changes were deployed, but also cultural strategy and art to ensure that there was a cultural shift among ridership in addressing this issue. And I think what also makes it unique is that it centered young people who led the effort. And I remember very distinctly one of the young people telling me that I can't believe that BART made these changes and this is happening in my lifetime. I thought I would be an old lady by the time sexual harassment was talked about and addressed on a transit system. And so it has been really meaningful to have communities directly impacted leading the effort and being decision makers in the process. And it has also given them a sense of ownership and pride when they ride their public transit system, knowing that it is something that they have some ownership over. And so some changes I want to highlight from the Not One More Girl effort included updating the Rider Code of Conduct to explicitly include unwanted sexual harassment, which is a non-criminal activity, but nonetheless something that affects riders, prohibiting sexual harassment, and creating kind of a comprehensive list of police and non-police resources on BART's website, but really placing an emphasis on non-police resources in recognition that not everyone who's affected by harassment of any kind has the same reaction or the same needs. Some people may want to report the incident, some people may want to get healing services. And I can go on and on and on about this initiative. BART just launched a phase 2, which I highly recommend for folks to check out, where they're giving out bystander intervention cards and resources, again, to cultivate this culture of care and community and solidarity. And then the last point of this framework is really centered around reducing harm. We know that policing is deeply embedded within many transportation systems. Whether we look at our roads or we look at our buses, there has always been a clear intersection there. And so in order to reduce harm and damage that so many communities face at the hands of transit police, and also through policies such as fare enforcement, we wanted to ensure that we were looking at how we can decriminalize some of the instances that create unnecessary and harmful interactions between riders and armed law enforcement. And so some of those examples look like having unarmed transit ambassadors, limiting police use of force, even looking at code enforcement, right? A code of conduct is very important, but it also doesn't require an armed police officer to enforce it. And so one example that I want to highlight is just locally in our own community, what SFMTA has done to decriminalize fare evasion. Their effort started in 2008 and very much ahead of the game in terms of looking to this issue of fare evasion. Unfortunately, AB 819, which was a bill that was on the governor's desk, was vetoed, and that bill sought to decriminalize fare evasion, which under current law is charged as a criminal misdemeanor charge and fined up to $400 and possibly 90 days in jail. This is a much higher punishment that you would receive when you look at the comparison to what happens when you're speeding, right? Which you don't get jail time or a criminal charge. And so the bill proposed moving that to a civil charge and offering alternatives for people to pay off those fines. And so in 2008, SFMTA decriminalized fare evasion, and they really shifted from a court-based approach to really having an in-house kind of payment plan and community service, knowing that not everyone can afford to pay off those fines and not everyone can afford to pay the fare in the first place. And so this program has now expanded to offer discounts or dismissals of tickets, especially paying close attention to unhoused individuals, and has really increased the ways that riders could pay. One of the things that we found in our research is that many people evade the fare for a number of different reasons. Sometimes it's because the fare machine is broken or they're unable to pay or they're in a rush. And so they've also taken efforts to make sure that those issues are addressed. But following this policy change, fare evasion did not increase and fare revenue did not decrease. And so this is a very hopeful example of what it could look like to decriminalize fare evasion, moving away from this enforcement approach and really thinking about a compliance approach that is more rooted in the broader nuanced understanding of where people stand financially. And then there's also examples in the report that you can see around reducing police use of force and limiting that and creating some accountability around policing. And so all that to say, right, there are so many ways that we can make our transit system safer. And as transit advocates, as people who are passionate about creating a transit-oriented community, it is all of our responsibility to think of how we can creatively create more safety on transit and therefore increase our ridership so we can have a thriving community and for everyone. And so with that, I will close out, and I genuinely hope that you are able to read the report and use that to advocate for changes in your community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Halima. Our gratitude really goes out to you for this work as well. And I'm really excited to continue and expand the conversation and introduce our panelists today to discuss the research. So the leaders we have here today were a part of this research and have been a part of the Safety Beyond Policing movement through their advocacy and their expertise. In no particular order, we're joined by Annie Lee, the Managing Director of Policy at Chinese for Affirmative Action. She co-leads policy at Stop AAPI Hate, and she came to Chinese for Affirmative Action and Stop AAPI Hate with a decade of legal experience, especially in education and civil rights. Her passion for serving students, particularly immigrants and English learners, stems from her experience as an 11th grade United States history teacher in the Bronx. Next, we have Osceola Sankara. He's an Equal Justice Works Fellow at the ACLU of Southern California. His work focuses on challenging transportation-related police practices that harm Black, Brown, and low-income people. Before joining the ACLU, Osceola served as a campaign manager for the Alliance for Community Transit in Los Angeles, where he led work to reimagine public safety on transit. Chris Van Eken encourages transit agencies to adopt best practices and mooted reforms, working for the Transit Center. Chris has advocated for better transit as an agency staff member and as an external advocate. He has provided technical support to the agencies in the US and abroad. And Rebecca Saltzman, who has served as a BART Board Director, District 3 since 2012. Rebecca has been a champion of police reform and the Progressive Policing Bureau, which has added an unarmed presence to the BART Police Department. Before she was elected, Rebecca spent years as a public transit and environmental policy advocate, coalition builder, organizer, and manager with local, state, and national issue-based organizations. So I'm hoping we can start off the conversation today and kind of hear from everyone on the panel about what safety on transit looks like to you and kind of what this brings to mind to start the conversation. And why don't we just go in the order that we read the bio? So starting with Annie and next to Osceola.
Thanks so much, Amy. Hi, everyone. And thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. When I think about safety, to me, it's not just the absence of harm, but it's the presence of thriving communities. It's communities where people can walk or take public transit to wherever they need to go. It's where there are shops and small businesses that are open and thriving, where there's high quality parks and schools and libraries. Particular to transit, like safe transit is a system that is accessible to everybody. So people who don't speak English, people with disabilities, LGBTQIA riders, caretakers traveling with children. So a system that works for everybody is a safe transit system, a transit system that is reliable so that nobody has to wait a really long time at bus stops or train stations. That's a safe system. And so similar to just thriving communities, like thriving transit systems are safe transit systems where there's riders at all times of day because everybody is choosing public transit. That's what transit safety means to me.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. I want to read actually a vision for transit safety that was authored by Coalition, Alliance for Community Transit LA, after a year-long process involving hundreds of transit riders. This is a vision that really resonates with me. I wanted to share it. Metro is a sanctuary. This is the vision for the future. Metro is a sanctuary for the public. The train and bus are fareless, consciously part of the region and integrated into people's daily lives and neighborhoods. Metro serves the public as libraries do, a public system where people go to feel safe, access information, and receive a high level of service. Metro feels honored to serve youth of color and be a resource for all. Los Angeles is proud of how we have embraced a healthy, community-serving, world-class transit system. I really love that vision. Again, this is put together by a community coalition of over 40 organizations representing a cross-section of groups throughout the LA region, all fighting for equitable development and a world-class transit system for all Angelenos. Personally, I'm a lifelong transit rider. I've never owned a car. I have pretty much used public transit almost every day of my life since I was like 11 or 12. And I've seen it all. I've felt safe, unsafe, and everything in between. Police have never, for me, been a source of safety. And many of my most vivid memories on public transit are situations where I watched somebody who looked like me be brutalized or violated by an officer in the name of public safety. So given that, I come to this work deeply, deeply excited to learn from others, to share knowledge around how we truly create transit systems that are safe for everybody, that are safe for all, and not just safe for some. Thank you.
Yes. All right. Hi, all. I am Chris once again. Thanks for having me again today. I think for me, I would just start with an acknowledgement that, safety for different populations can mean a lot of different things. We all have very different needs when we get onto our transit system. And I think one of the greatest challenges agencies have are meeting those various needs while not, overburdening certain populations, as we've seen in the past, with the brunt of the response to whatever public safety complaints certain other populations might have. But for me, an agency or a system that's truly safe is one where there's not only system presence through people using the system and circulating throughout it, but you also work for the system, and not necessarily just police officers. We actually want to reduce the number of police officers we have and see folks that are doing other functions throughout the system, be it addressing the needs of unhoused folks in the system or just doing wayfinding functions for people that don't know where they're going or just on the system for the first time. So I think a real system that feels really robust and safe to me is one where all populations feel welcome and supported when they're there. And if they're having any sort of trouble or any sort of disorder befalls them while they're there, they're pointed in the direction of social services that can help them, remedy whatever problem or issue they might be experiencing. And they feel like they're being taken care of when they're on the system, not like they're being policed and told to move along their way as they get from one place to another.
First, thanks to Transform for having us all here today and writing this groundbreaking report. I'm Rebecca Saltzman, BART Director, and I agree with everything that's been said, and thank you all. Safety on transit means every single person feels safe, and like others have said, that means something different to everybody, and depending where they're coming at this from, what part of their life they're in, what community they're in. And so transit agencies need to think about all the different populations and really adapt safety measures to prioritize serving people who are facing the most barriers to mobility. And often these are low-income people of color, women, girls, transgender, and gender expansive people. And it's through both kind of the safety efforts we have within and outside of police departments, and it's also how we talk about things. BART has had kind of an off and on campaign about everyone is welcome on BART, and I think that's really important to constantly both communicate that in words, but then also to communicate that in actions. And I look forward to the conversation coming up where we'll talk about that.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone. And we've got a bunch of questions to go through today, and I'll be directing them to specific folks, but really encourage all the panelists to kind of unmute and chime in, share your expertise. So next I'll move to Osceola. I would just love to hear some of your favorite specific examples of successful non-police safety interventions.
Sure. I will share three. The first is Metro's new Transit Ambassador program. It started as a pilot as a result of a motion introduced by one Metro board member, Mike Bonin, during the summer 2020 George Floyd uprising, when communities, millions across the country, were demanding from public leaders non-police approaches to safety, reimagining safety. The LA Metro Board just decided to move forward with a process to bring the transit ambassadors in-house. It's currently contracted and a pilot program. The transit ambassadors have had 500,000 interactions with passengers over the time period measured by Metro. And I've also been able to save dozens of lives. 55 individuals who were overdosing were provided life-saving Narcan. And overwhelmingly, the public response to the program has been positive. That's one great example. Another at Metro, related to bus operators. Metro responded to an uptick in assault on operators a few years ago, I believe this was 2015, by installing more protective bus barriers as a way to prevent violent incidents between riders and operators. They measured the effects and they were able to show that the assaults on operators declined dramatically. In some cases, assaults dropped to virtually zero. But what they also found was that the bus operators didn't report afterwards feeling more safe, even though the assaults had actually decreased. So I think there's a lesson learned there, right? That the feeling of safety is not always directly related to the reduction of actual risk of harm, which leads me to my third example, which is totally outside of the transit context. Google, when they were putting together their first brick and mortar location, they decided that they wanted to not survey people on what type of internal design made them feel most comfortable and at ease and most likely to shop. They rigged some people up with sensors that measured heart rate, that measured brain waves and upticks in brain activity in the amygdala, parts of the brain associated with anxiety, right, and fear response. And they were able to show specific types of design, of internal design, that can reduce people's fear, anxiety, and increase sense of ease and comfort. So that there's just like 1,000,001 different ways to make people feel safe, comfortable, and at ease that don't require somebody who has the power to kill. And those are three of what I think are very interesting, the most interesting approaches.
And Rebecca, I'd love to hear from you thinking about our North Bay context.
Yeah, so we've done several things at BART and we're not done. So I'm listening for new ideas of things we can do. But one we did most recently, and it was part of the Not One More Girl initiative. Last month, we shortened BART trains from 10-car to 6-car, 8-car. And you might think of that, how is that a safety solution? What does that do? But what we were hearing from young women and gender expansive youth is that they didn't feel safe on BART trains when there weren't that many people on them, especially late at night, especially for folks who live at the end of a line like I do, that, you know, maybe when you're in San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley, those places, it's pretty crowded. You get further out and it starts to empty out and people didn't feel safe. And so shortening those trains means when you get in a 6-car train, you're probably going to see some folks even out to the end of the line. And I can tell you it makes a big difference. I just had a personal experience the other night coming into Oakland Airport at 11 p.m. and taking BART. 6-car train pulled up. I was easily able to find a car with lots of people on it. More people got on as we went. And it felt incredibly safe, even though, it was late at night and I was coming back exhausted. So I think little things like that can make a really big difference without costing BART any money. Actually, it saves us money on power. So and that came again, not from us, but from the community. And so it's really important to listen to the community. And then the bigger thing we've done is just our full progressive policing and community engagement bureau, which started off like with Metro as a pilot with ambassadors. So those were unarmed ambassadors on the cars and in the stations to help people with issues that are happening, and who, are able to call on the police when needed, but are also able to divert calls. It was a little controversial when we first started it, and it was, introduced by our board. My fellow board member, Bevan Dufty, introduced it and had a lot of support on the board, less so for management and the police department. It was a little bit of an uphill battle, but we got there with the pilot. And once the pilot was happening, everybody at BART, changed their mind about it. They supported it. Management, the police department, the chief of police, even the police unions, they saw that there were all these issues that actually they weren't well equipped to handle. So we've expanded it since then, hiring crisis intervention specialists who have more training to help people who are having a mental health crisis, people who are dealing with substance use issues, people who are unhoused, really helping them to get support. And they're diverting thousands of calls from the police, and also just being an unarmed presence on a train that people can turn to feel safe riding BART. So it's been really transformative, and we're looking forward to continuing it and to expanding it in the future.
Great, thank you. So I'm curious to hear, what steps are recommended for policymakers and community leaders and organizations interested in implementing these non-police safety interventions. And Annie, maybe you could respond there first.
Yes, thanks, Amy. I think one critical first step is sharing and harnessing stories like Halima's. So Halima, I'm so sorry you went through that, but I'm also so glad that you're able to share that. And at Stop AAPI Hate, we're the national leading aggregator of self-reported anti-AAPI hate incidents. And there's power in that, because when you experience hate individually, you often feel like there's nothing you can do. But when you put all of these stories together, you can move policy. So at Stop AAPI Hate, we've had lots and lots of accounts of anti-AAPI hate on transit. Most of these are not hate crimes, so you really cannot look to policing or prosecution to resolve this. Most of it is verbal harassment. That's not saying that it's not important. It is very important, and it changes how people move through public spaces, and whether they feel like they should use transit at all. But it just means that we've got to find a different solution for this very real problem that not just our communities face, but also lots of Black and Latino women face these issues of racialized and sexualized harassment on transit, LGBTQ community members, and so many of our other community members that rely on transit every day. So what we did is we harnessed these stories and worked with other communities to pass two laws in California. So last year we passed SB 1161, and this year we passed SB 434, which are legislative efforts to elevate rider voices so that transit agencies can hear directly from their riders about harassment. And so SB 1161 is being implemented right now. The Mineta Transportation Institute at San Jose State has created the first of its kind community survey about harassment for transit agencies to use. They're going to unveil this in December, so keep your eyes peeled for that. And we are working with them to translate it into several AAPI languages so that people who do not speak English are also able to share their experiences with their transit agency. And then next year, SB 434 will take effect, and that requires the top 10 transit agencies in the state to collect qualitative and quantitative data about rider experiences with harassment. We want transit agencies to hear from their riders. And there was a great question here about what do you do about the transit agencies that really like police as an intervention? I think SB 434 is a really great opportunity for community organizations to like lift up voices, to organize and make sure that their communities and their experiences, including experiences with police, are shared with transit agencies so that they hear them. The law also requires that this data gets published so that it's not just housed somewhere that never gets used, but actually available. And all personally identifiable information is redacted to protect privacy, but it's just really important that riders are able to express themselves and share their vision, including no police, if that's what the vision is. And it'll be made public so that researchers can use that, and for transit agencies themselves to start to develop solutions in accordance to what their community members are saying. So that's one way to use like real lived experiences to shape policy. And I really hope we can start to export things like Not One More Girl beyond BART, but to other agencies as well. But I'll pass it off to Chris, who might have more on this.
Yeah, I think I would add a great need for transit agencies to be more open and transparent when they embark on their safety programs. So make sure that you're sharing your goals with the community. Make sure you're sharing any data you may have on public safety, not just the level of crimes, but also use of force incidents and other things that might befall riders when they're on the system. So when advocates and the community come to you to speak about these things, they're sort of a level playing field. You're not hiding information that folks might need to know as they think about what public safety could look like. There's a need to listen to and learn from community groups, especially community groups that represent riders and vulnerable populations. Agencies often listen to, powerful interest groups. They often listen to communities that are often very loud about public safety, but they don't talk to vulnerable communities and folks that have been subject to violence from police in the past, to make sure that when they're designing their systems that they don't overburden those communities once again, but they actually work to remedy the issues that we see on our systems, which are often a consequence of social inequality, not of crime. And people don't just go on transit to commit crimes for the most part. We need to make sure that people feel supported on those systems. So you need a robust community process to make sure you're designing a system that accomplishes that. And I think, again, a lot of folks have said this, but there's a need to increase presence, not through the use of police officers, but through unarmed and uniformed ambassadors conducting a number of roles when they're on the system, to make sure folks feeling taken care of and feel like they're in a welcoming place when they get on the public transit system. There is a role for police officers to play in public safety, but it's not collecting fares. It is not bullying folks that are dancing on a train. It is not doing a whole host of other things that do not require a gun to enforce that people are not disturbing other riders. We need to limit the use of police officers to just when they're needed, when there's a violent incident that needs to be investigated, or when there's a real need for workplace safety. There's been an alarming increase on assaults on transit workers, and they often do call for more police to be on the system. And I think there are targeted ways that we can use them, but we can't just wholesale add police officers across the system. We need to make sure that we do it in a careful way, so bus operators and people that clean bus stops and train stations feel safe while they're working, but we're not creating sort of a wholesale dragnet of police officers, or whatever you want to call it, to ensure that workforce safety. We have to be much more careful and targeted when we do that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us and sharing. And I'm curious if as our questions from the audience are coming in, and please use the Q&A function for that, because I'm not able to distinguish in the chat while also moderating. I'm curious if we could hear from everyone on really how you envision this report being used and influencing transit policy, and also kind of the movement to expand safety beyond policing. And we can start with Osceola.
Thanks. I think that we need to do more work to close the gap between perceptions of safety and proposed solutions. Because right now the gap is so enormous that it's very easily exploited by organizations, media outlets, and individuals that are proposing punitive solutions, but not in good faith. And these measures are not measures that include safety. And I was reading this really interesting article in the LA Times last week about a new book about neuroscience, and the author was describing how societies in medieval Europe approached epilepsy in years past. Individuals with epilepsy were seen as possessed by demons, as guilty of witchcraft, and were perceived as threats to the community. And so the proposed solution, the implemented solution, was often castration, torture, and execution. But over the years, as science around medicine and illness advanced, it was, individuals and communities were able to see that people with epilepsy were suffering from a specific disease, and that there are specific interventions that can reduce the harms associated with that disease. And so the gap between the perception of safety or danger and the proposed solution was just massively shrunk, right? And I think when you experience that shrink, there's a reduction of fear because having knowledge, understanding the cause of something frightening is deeply empowering. So what does that mean for a transit context? I'm really looking for transit agencies in the next year to truly adopt a public health approach to safety and well-being on transit. Specifically, LA Metro is considering creating an entire new in-house, they're calling it community safety department, which presents a huge opportunity to do this work. And what would it look like for LA Metro to adopt actual evidence-based practices around how to reduce interpersonal violence in a transit context, how to reduce harassment in a transit context? Maybe instead of hiring more crime analysts, 10, 15 crime analysts to present monthly crime statistics, LA Metro can hire 15 to 20 epidemiologists whose specialty is measuring and reducing interpersonal violence. I think that there's lots that we could do around data collection. Other panelists have mentioned this, very important. And one area specifically is that has not been addressed in the past by transit agencies, I think, is the harms of policing. When agencies are discussing how to adjust the police presence, usually adjusting it upwards, the conversation is always about costs, financial costs, and the conversation is very rarely about the social costs. But we have so much research today that shows that there are enormous social costs associated with policing. So, for example, community health research has shown that mothers of children, not the children themselves, mothers of children who are stopped by police, even a single stop, are more likely to report sleep problems due to depression and anxiety. We have research that shows that local killings by police officers in the Los Angeles area led to nearly 2,000 Black and Latinx students to leave schools before graduating when they controlled for other factors. I've seen this personally. I remember getting off the train on my way to high school and walking up the stairwell and seeing a cop shove this young Black man against the wall and pull down his pants to his ankles. And this was during the winter. There was snow covering the stairwell. And I just, I caught his eye as we walked past, and I just felt, it wasn't even me. I felt so humiliated and endangered. And I had that memory every time I walked up that stairwell to go to school. And then I have to go to school and, try not to think about this. And that was just one incident. That cost is never measured by transit agencies when they're having these conversations. And that needs to change immediately. Racism is a threat to public health. Implicit bias is a threat to public health. And whoa, my camera is agreeing with me, I guess. And we're in a place where I think a lot of this can be measured. And along with that too, and this is the last thing I'll say before I pass it off. There's a lot of danger and harm and unsafety associated with public transit, and there's also an enormous safety benefit. And again, having accurate information can be really empowering. Montreal, some researchers looked at bus service over 10 years, and they estimated the number of crashes that were prevented and lives saved due to the ridership along those 10 bus lines. And the number of crashes prevented was, above 1,500 over that 10 years. But transit agencies aren't out there, with plastering that data all over the buses and trains, saying like, look, you, by choosing to get on the bus, to get on the train, you have reduced your level of risk of harm, in many ways. So I think there's a lot of different ways that we can go about doing this. But I think especially for LA Metro, given that they're like in the process of potentially creating a new community safety department, they really need to make those adjustments now and listen to the community groups like ACT LA and SAGE and others that are articulating powerful and transformative solutions for public safety.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. And yeah, I think I'll let panelists unmute now as desired. And I might even pepper in a couple more questions since we're running short on time. So we're thinking about, how do you envision this report being used to influence transit agencies in the transit policy space? Thea Selby asked, how can we get more funding for this work? And wanted to include one other thing. Drew Hanna had also asked about programs where if folks want to call for help and they don't want to call the police, what are some good examples there?
I guess I can jump in on the main question and then the additional questions. First, on the kind of how you can ask for help, and it's something people brought up, and maybe we need to relook at this. But within, when you contact BART Police now, whether it's through you call or you text or you use the BART Watch app, they kind of make a decision on who to send, whether it's an ambassador or crisis intervention specialist or a police officer, based on what kind of call is coming in. But that is a good suggestion that maybe we need to let people decide too, who they're asking for. So that's something I can go back and recommend. And then just, in terms of how we can use this report and influence what's happening, I think it should be required reading for every transit agency board member. So let's all get it out to all of those board members and managers. And I think transit agencies should really work with the community and the riders, like we've done with Not One More Girl. It's much more powerful that way, and you don't need to reinvent the wheel. Other agencies are doing really strong things, so they can be copied. Several agencies have come to BART and asked us for our progressive policing model, and we're happy to share it. So we all really need to work together. And then finally, and this touches on the funding piece, but a different side of it, but something that the report highlights is that frequent high quality transit service creates this virtuous loop where by increasing ridership and you decrease the likelihood of incidents while waiting on empty vehicles or in empty stations. And so a lot of transit agencies right now are in a fiscal crisis based on the pandemic and the aftermath of it. And so we have to bring more funding that's sustainable to all transit agencies, whether that's coming from the federal, state, or regional level, because we have to continue to run robust service. Because with all these programs that are amazing, if we have to cut service in half, transit will be less safe and also, less desirable for people to use. So we have to look at all of the things at the same time and continue to work together on that.
I'm going to jump in here too. Sorry, I was silent because I'm still reeling from the account that Osceola shared as which is horrible and should never, ever happen. But this conversation is really interesting to me because I talk a lot about verbal harassment because that's mainly what we see happen. And I see this emphasis on police somewhat, but it's a problem you cannot arrest your way out of. Like, you cannot arrest your way out of verbal harassment for lots of reasons. For practical reasons, what am I going to do? I'm going to apprehend someone who calls me a racialized or sexualized slur, wait for law enforcement to get here. Nobody's going to prosecute that. You cannot change the verbal harassment that women and LGBTQ communities and women of color like experience. But what we need to do is take a public health approach, as was suggested, and change our culture. We have to change our culture to be one of care for each other. And it's one of the reasons I really like this report and its elevation of Not One More Girl, because there you can use, we have to think more creatively. And we always think about police, but like there's so much more. We can use art. We can use youth created art to help explain to riders that silence is not consent. We can help explain that we care for each other and we should treat each other with mutual kindness and respect. I know that sounds so silly, but it works. And whenever I talk about like verbal harassment or street harassment, people are like, that's a problem we're never going to solve because people are going to treat people badly all the time. There are lots of problems that we thought we couldn't solve. You know, we didn't think we could solve smoking, but you had a whole public health campaign that shifted the way we behave, and we have significantly stopped smoking. The same with seatbelts. We used to never wear seatbelts. How could we enforce that? Like a person would wear a seatbelt in their own car, but like through public health campaigns and safety campaigns, we have educated people that that is what you do. And now it is like second nature. There is a way we can shift culture and make these changes to make safer communities for all of us that do not rely on police, but are actually more effective.
Yeah, and I think this report and hosting forums like this do an incredible amount of work towards, educating folks on the dangers of relying on a police presence solely as a means of intervening when there's disorder on a public transit system. I think there's a need for education, not only of the public, but folks that work in public transit. There needs to be just more discussion of the plethora of options that are at our disposal, really informing not only the people that ride the system, but the people that run the system, that we have so many different tools in our toolbox for addressing this, and that we have to think more deeply about how to do this and do it in conjunction with our communities.
Well, thank you all so much. I think this conversation could go on for a long time. There are a lot more questions in the chat. I also just wanted to lift up a couple of things that we won't have time to discuss today, but folks were asking questions about and interested in: community ambassadors, bystander intervention training, de-escalation training, transit operator safety, and how we fund transit, how we fund frequent and reliable transit, so that this essential service can really thrive. And just coming today and joining us on this webinar, to our audience, thank you guys so much. And Halima, Annie, Chris, Rebecca, Osceola, our policy director, Zach, is on tech right now. It's going to take a village for this movement. So many people were interviewed for this report and research. Many of you guys are on the line, and we just appreciate everyone's work in elevating this issue, because as we've talked about today, it's going to take a lot of work and conversations to think about how we move beyond policing to cultivate inclusive transit safety for all. So please stay in touch with us. Share the report. You can access it at tinyurl.com/transformsafety. Our website is transformca.org. Sign up for our newsletter. We're putting reports out on the regular. We're wanting to share good ideas and hear from thought leaders. And yeah, I'm so full of gratitude for everyone on the call, and really appreciate the work today. And thank you everyone for joining us.